In 1927, Babe Ruth hit 60 home runs to shatter the single-season home run record. His image was all over newsreels and advertising. The Babe was possibly the first sports celebrity in American history. It helped that he played for the New York Yankees. New York was by far the biggest, most important city in the country. It was ground zero for the new immigrants, the center of finance, and the media capital of the country. Advertising, publishing, and music from New York got broadcast across the country. Babe Ruth's face and the team he played for became the most recognizable icons in sports. On the West Coast, Los Angeles grew to be the biggest city in California, due in part to Hollywood. Movies produced there were shown in theaters across the country. Every big city and small town in America got blasted with ads from the East Coast and movies from the West Coast. A nationwide mass culture developed for the first time. It used to be that Americans lived in farming communities with their own little cultures and flavors. By the 1920s, a unified popular culture invaded them from both coasts, and not everyone appreciated it. Not only was the rural Protestant way of life losing ground to the industrial immigrant cities, but now those cities were flooding the country with their music, movies, products, and celebrities. Sometimes those movies showed women with short skirts and short hair, dancing, drinking, and smoking. They were so ubiquitous that they became a symbol for the new woman of the 1920s, the flapper, named for the way their skirts flapped just below their knees. The flapper image was a product of urban mass culture. She symbolized a more free, independent woman than existed before. But symbols are often misleading. Things like location, race, and social class shaped how independent any woman could be. Mass culture may have fixated on the flapper, but the reality for women was much more complicated. Women activists scored a major victory in 1920 when the 19th Amendment guaranteed their right to vote. This was part of a struggle that went way back before the culture wars. Women were active in the abolitionist movement and the movement to ban alcohol before the Civil War. After the Civil War, white middle-class women became one of the most educated demographics in the country, making them vital to the progressive movement. Part of that movement involved expanding public schools. At first, this meant a one-room schoolhouse with students of vastly different ages in the same class. Over time, schools became more segregated by age. High school became more widespread, especially for middle-class children. During the 1920s, overall high school attendance more than doubled from 2.2 million to 5 million. Middle-class boys and girls spent their teenage years around each other instead of their families. Rather than being expected to work or take on household duties, teenagers were treated like older children. A new word was used to describe them: adolescence. Many middle-class adolescent girls went on to college. By 1920, around 47% of all college students were female. Adolescents in the early 1900s spent more time away from parental supervision than any generation before them. For girls, this meant their families had much less control over who they married. Young people developed a new way to find partners: dating. Before dating, there was calling. Calling was when a young man would show up to a woman's house and leave a card, a calling card, which was how he expressed interest. There were informal rules as to when and how to leave a calling card, sort of like how people make informal rules for dating today. The woman decided whether she wanted to entertain the man or not. If so, their first meetings took place in her house under the watchful eye of her parents. The woman eventually decided if a man made a suitable mate, although parents also played a role in her decision. The more time adolescents spent away from their parents, the less they participated in the ritual of calling. Middle-class boys and girls decided on their own who they entertained. Cars allowed them to go out of the house, and new forms of entertainment gave them places to go, on dates. Even new immigrant youngsters in the cities adapted the practice, since their homes were too crowded to participate in a calling ritual. Magazines published dating advice. Advertisements sold beauty products to young women. Movies featured women in flapper skirts and makeup out on dates or in dance halls smoking and drinking. Many people in Protestant small-town America believed it glorified irresponsible behavior and immorality. Makeup products like rouge were traditionally associated with prostitutes. Now mass media was making it mainstream. We saw a similar dynamic play out when Bad Bunny performed at the Super Bowl. Middle America rebelled against the Spanish-speaking performance, the lively dancing, the intoxicating beats, all of which they associated with an immoral mass culture. They feel like they're losing the America they used to know, so they organized their own halftime show, where a guy sang about petting a fish and a 55-year-old man yelled "Ba diddy ba." Okay. But the dancing and the makeup were nothing compared to the big culture war battle for women in the 1920s. Sex. Educated middle-class women usually wanted to put their educations to use, which meant having careers. This didn't mean they didn't want to be wives and mothers, since most evidence shows that they did, but they also wanted fulfillment outside the home, not to mention money. This made birth control necessary, since pregnancy made holding down a career a little harder. Abortion and birth control really weren't hot-button issues until the late 1800s. As women became more educated, as the women's rights movement grew, abortion rates increased. Birth control products became more popular. Men feared that women were taking control of reproduction. The more control they had over reproduction, the more they could pursue opportunities outside of home life, and the less need they would have for marriage. Between 1880 and 1940, the average white woman went from having 4.4 children to 2.1 children, and the average black woman went from having 7.5 children to 3 children. By 1928, 1 in 6 marriages ended in divorce, a major increase from 1 in 10 before the war. These statistics suggest that the woman's role in marriage was changing. They didn't accept the idea of bearing and rearing large families or having to stay with husbands with whom they weren't happy. In response, Congress passed the Comstock Act in 1873. It all but outlawed abortion and made it illegal to transport birth control products like condoms. Despite this law, women still got abortions. Wealthy and middle-class women could find doctors willing to perform them safely and quietly. Poor women went to unqualified black market quacks or took homemade concoctions, both of which put their health at risk. The abortion issue remained underground until the 1960s, when a new wave of feminism brought it to public attention once more. So women activists of the 1920s turned to birth control. The rise of the flapper image in dating culture made it easier to publicly talk about sex. Emma Goldman, the communist activist who was deported to Russia, made birth control a major part of her speeches. Some of her opponents accused her of using birth control as a communist plot to undermine American families. It made sense to people at the time, since one of the first things Russia did after it went communist was make birth control and divorce easier for women. In fact, it was the only country on earth with a higher divorce rate than the United States in the 1920s. So any women who advocated birth control left themselves open to accusations of being a closet communist. A woman named Margaret Sanger learned this firsthand in 1914 when she was arrested for publicly advocating for birth control. She fled to England to avoid trial and returned a year later after the charges were dropped. The most well-known women's activists stayed far away from her, since most of them were still focused on getting the 19th Amendment passed. They feared that being associated with someone like Sanger would hurt their chances of winning women's suffrage. Sanger needed to find a way to get her point across without giving communist or loose woman vibes. The culture wars of the 1920s gave her her chance. Like abortion, it was relatively easy for middle-class white women to find birth control. There would always be doctors willing to provide it under the table. Poor women didn't have this luxury. This posed a problem to certain people in America, specifically the racists. After all, if middle-class white women, waspy, educated white women, were able to avoid having kids, while poor women, poor immigrant and black women, could not avoid it, then America would be overrun by the type of people they hated. The Johnson-Reed Act already succeeded in cutting off immigration, but that wouldn't matter if all the immigrants who were already here kept having children, while the white Anglo-Saxon races didn't. So Margaret Sanger argued that if waspy middle-class white women could have birth control, poor women should be able to have it as well. It was the only chance America had of maintaining Anglo-Saxon supremacy. People who oppose abortion today use this against Sanger to paint her as a racist, presumably to make abortion sound racist as well. But this is a misinterpretation of Sanger's views and intentions. She used the country's racism to her advantage to advance her cause. It was cynical, yes, but also effective. She was also cynical when she used the male ego to her advantage. See, many doctors opposed birth control. After all, most doctors were men, and they didn't like the fact that Sanger, a woman who used to work as a nurse, was telling them how to dispense health care. They didn't have any good medical reasons for opposing birth control. It was only their egos that stood in the way. So Sanger tracked down as many male doctors as she could who were willing to publicly support birth control. She brought them with her on speaking tours and published their names in her brochures. As time went on, this made birth control seem more normal and acceptable, not just a communist plot. She never succeeded in getting rid of the Comstock Act, but she helped open 55 birth control clinics across 23 cities by 1930, and that number only increased from there. And thanks to the research of some of these doctors, a birth control pill was patented in 1960. It was the only form of birth control that gave women complete power over their reproductive health. In 1965, the Supreme Court declared birth control totally legal as a right to privacy between couples. In the 1970s, the court applied a similar logic to abortion, saying that abortions were legal because they were part of medical privacy. Sanger had to fight for birth control with the tools that she had available to her in 1920. Other women asked the question, what if she had better tools? Once the 19th Amendment passed in 1920, women activists disagreed on what to do next. The head of a group called the National Woman's Party, Alice Paul, knew exactly what she wanted, an equal rights amendment. She wrote the amendment herself, and it was very clear. Men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction. She hoped its simplicity would make it irresistible for Congress to pass, and simple enough so that 3/4 of the states would be willing to vote for it and make it part of the Constitution. But it wasn't simple. It caused furious debates in the women's rights movement that continue to this day. Not everyone agreed that men and women were equal. Women couldn't even agree on that. Many feminists back then and today are what we might call social feminists. They believe that there is a fundamental difference between men and women. There are issues that concern women much more than men. After winning the right to vote, social feminists wanted to tackle issues of poverty and social welfare, things that disproportionately affected women. After all, even in the 1920s, marriage remained the #1 path open to women to make a living. This made them more prone to poverty if their husbands got sick or died. Even today, we have a feminization of poverty, where women are more likely to be poor than men. Alice Paul wasn't concerned with this. She was what we might call an ideological feminist. She believed that all the differences between men and women were socially constructed, made up to keep women in an inferior position. Only an equal rights amendment could knock these walls down. The Equal Rights Amendment, known as the ERA, didn't make it out of Congress in the 1920s, but it did make it out of Congress in the 1970s, and Alice Paul was still alive to witness it. By that time, a second feminist movement had already moved issues like abortion, work, and education to the forefront. After Congress passed it, it looked like it would be easy to get 3/4 of the states to approve it, but it just missed, and eventually it died. And the thing that killed it was religious fundamentalism. We learned earlier that the Protestant fundamentalists organized and grew their power after the Scopes trial. By the 1970s, they had become a political juggernaut. A woman named Phyllis Schlafly made a name for herself by opposing the ERA. She postured as a devout Catholic who feared that the ERA would threaten women's roles as wives and mothers. She combined social feminism with religious fundamentalism.
40 million women are being supported by their husbands today, and I think you ought to thank me every
equal work.
I think you should thank me every day for encouraging those women to be in the home so they are not competing with you in the workforce.
I am not.
Well, you've heard. Fundamentalists also opposed the ERA in the 1920s. One of the new Ku Klux Klan's beliefs was pure womanhood. They believed that the college-educated flapper women of the 1920s were selfish because they rejected their duties of motherhood. In 1923, a group called the Women of the Ku Klux Klan was established to protect pure womanhood. Most of the foot soldiers of the culture wars also concerned themselves with issues of masculinity and sexuality. Besides the Klan, J. Edgar Hoover was obsessed with the sex lives of the people he spied on. It was common for him to label people he believed were communist as gay, or people he knew to be gay as communist. To him, they were both corrosive to American values.
What they really want is a gay rights amendment. They want to make it so that a man can marry a man just like a man can marry a woman, and we don't want the curse of Sodom and Gomorrah on our country. That's why we don't want it. If every person of either sex can do what the other sex can do, then two men can get married or two women can get married, and if we got that, we got Sodom and Gomorrah, and we don't need to have fire falling from heaven on us.
It's no surprise that these types of hyper-masculine movements appealed to white men. Back before the 1900s, white men in Protestant Middle America were raised with a certain list of expectations. They were going to work on their farms, marry a nice woman, have a big family, and make a good enough living to sustain it all. But by the 1920s, farming became increasingly difficult. The economy that supposedly roared during the 1920s didn't roar for them. By the time the 30s came around, their farms became dust, and they became another group of migrants going to the cities for factory jobs. And while they were miserable, they saw women that were developing confidence, African Americans that were playing jazz music, immigrants buying homes, and evolution being taught in their schools. White men in America, even today, are raised to think that they were going to rule the world. And when they don't, they accuse people who they think are doing better than them of cheating. This type of attitude is alive and well today. Podcast bros yell at OnlyFans models because they make money off their looks. That's cheating.
When you say disrespectful things about women, I'm not taking you seriously.
I'm not being disrespectful. I'm being very honest here that women don't offer men as much utility as men offer women. That's a fact.
ICE agents harass brown people because they think they're in the country illegally. That's cheating.
I got rights to talk, bro.
You got no right here.
I do.
Illegal, brother.
The black female Supreme Court justice, presidential candidate, or doctor only got that far because of DEI, supposedly. That's cheating.
You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot. Oh no, imagine the world without Joy Reid. Imagine the world without Sheila Jackson Lee or Michelle Obama or Ketanji Brown Jackson. I'm only here because of anti-white, anti-Asian forced discrimination policies.
While we could explain their anger, we can't justify it. It's just as stupid now as it was in the 1920s. The flappers didn't depress crop prices. The jazz musician didn't blow the farms away. The OnlyFans model isn't why you can't buy a house. The immigrant didn't cause inflation. Instead of blaming a system that sets us up to fail, we bully people who we think are beneath us. This is the source of all culture wars, whether they were in the 1920s or 2020s. And if you're not fighting the culture wars, if you're blaming a rigged system that's designed to keep you down, well, then you might just be a communist.